Welcome, everyone, to another program from Women of Adith. Today's title or the series is called Bible Heroes or Commentary with Dr. Anna Urowitz Freudenstein, who is back by popular demand. We had many requests for another series, and I asked on what topic, and they said whatever. They just want to do something with Anna. So Anna, we're excited to have you. Today's program, well, the whole program is our ancient holy literature is multi-layered and multifaceted. Many important stories are not even found in the Bible itself. We will explore some of them and see which are in the Bible, which come later, and discuss it if it really matters. So today's program, interestingly, is Eve, Encounter with the Devilish Talking Snake. Anna, we await what you're going to teach us today.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I was just asking, actually, Carol and the other Anna about what's happening with Zoom and everything at the shul and in life. And it seems like you guys are still using it as a tool to be together and for our purposes to learn Torah together. So I think that's amazing. Especially I'm thinking about not too long from now when the weather gets colder. And of course, in Toronto, as the traffic gets worse, there is something to be said for not having the commuting time and having more time to be together this way in a meaningful way to learn Torah together. So I feel a little bit strange saying it's nice to see some faces again because most of you I've actually never met in real life. I've really just seen you as, little boxes, kind of like old Hollywood squares style. And but I think I see some familiar names and faces, so I'm happy to see them. Of course, if you haven't been here before, we're also very happy to see you. That being said, actually, I should just mention, of course, we hope you're here for all 6 of our sessions. But if you can't make it to all of them, everything that we'll be doing is pretty much stand alone. I will, whenever I draw on previous information, either from this session or even from previous sessions, which I'm going to go in assuming that we're starting from a blank slate and I will present the idea afresh. So even if you have been here, it'll be a nice review for you. And if you haven't been here, you'll be able to join along where we are.
Anna,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we're going to take a break as we have in the past, halfway through. So please put any questions you have in the chat, and Anna will stop halfway and we'll take those questions, and then we'll do questions again at the end.
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting, but I had to do my job.
No, that's perfect. I'm so happy you did also because I like the idea that to show that we can have some level of discussion by sharing of ideas in terms of asking questions or sharing comments. Thank God our group is big enough that it would be hard just to do that as a regular free-for-all, during my speaking. So we have to get it a little bit more organized. So we do it that way, midway through and at the end. So don't feel bad if it's something from the beginning and it's really in the middle. You're just going according to, as Carol said, the rules. And so that's fine. Okay. So when I was contacted by Carol and by Randy and the shul to pick a new topic this time for us, and they said, "Oh, Eddie, you can just do anything." That was really too broad for me. It was really hard to figure out how to narrow something down. So we came up with this idea, and I thought, okay, great. We've narrowed it down. And now, as I've started preparing for the sessions, though, I've realized even though it seems pared down, it is not. Each of the 6 sessions that we're going to do together, I could do a whole year on. So actually, it was a little bit difficult for me and frustrating for me to figure out how to present things to you in a meaningful like deep, but also doable way in an hour's time. And it involves some picking and choosing, obviously. So we obviously cannot cover everything. That being said, it's always very interesting to me is, I don't know, actually, I mean, in terms of some of you've met me online before and some haven't, I started teaching with you guys, having to do with women in Jewish history, which is a huge love of mine. But my actual doctoral work, my PhD, is in Midrash, which is a very particular type of rabbinic interpretation, rabbinic commentary. So, and that is much more textual. So, this was an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about Midrash and also to demonstrate about what it is by comparing and contrasting it a little bit with original biblical texts, focusing on specific characters. So that's what we're going to do. So in order to do that, we're going to have to learn some Bible, sometimes in the text itself. Sometimes I'll be, paraphrasing, summarizing, just in the interest of time. And then discussing some of the ideas that are there, that are some of those ideas, because these are pretty important biblical figures, are kind of out there in the culture as well. We're actually going to be looking at some Christian ideas today, even though this is a class in Torah and in Midrash, because we live in a Judeo-Christian culture. And, if you're a part enough of the outside world to have a computer and know how to run the internet, no matter how Jewish you have been influenced by Christianity if you're living here in North America. That is certainly true for the topic that we are discussing today. So, with all of that in mind, what we're going to do is look at a little bit about Eve in the biblical text, maybe then think about some stereotypes and some ideas relating to an aspect of her, and look at some text related to that, and do some midrashim about that as well. Now, of course, this is huge because this isn't only the first woman, but this is like the beginning of good and evil. It is the beginning of free choice. It is the beginning of sex. It is the beginning of coming out of the perfection of Eden into the world. That's a lot. That's a lot. We will focus in on certain aspects of it. Okay, so there's my lengthy introduction. And but I think we kind of needed it this time, actually, and also a way to start getting used to each other again. And now I'm going to take us over to the share screen. For people who haven't been here before, I always prepare a slides presentation so you don't have to only look at my face the whole time, and also because I think it's important to share text together, to have those texts on the screen so that we can look at them at the same time. All right, so here's our official title, and here we go. Of course, sometimes I do try to share some artwork along the way. There are a lot of things about Adam and Eve and the snake. This one in particular is by William Blake, and it is showing a relationship, a connection, perhaps somewhat of an intimate connection between the snake or serpent. I'm going to use those words interchangeably. In Hebrew, it's the same word, nachash, and our first woman ever, namely Eve. I'm assuming, based on the fact that Adam is lying down here, that this is probably right after the creation of Eve, perhaps, when she was taken out of his side or rib. Not really sure. All right, there's one visual for you. Let's go ahead and read some Torah together. What I've given you here is chapter 3 of the book of Genesis. That's going to be our main focus today. And we're going to be talking about the snake in the Garden of Eden, talking to and enticing and tricking Eve into eating that fruit she's not supposed to eat. I'm assuming, of course, some kind of basic underlying knowledge of this story, but of course, it's completely natural if you've forgotten some of the details because they're confusing, and also because you might have studied some of the details in conjunction with some of the interpretations that we're going to talk about also, which can lead to a confusion. And the point here is we're looking for clarity rather than confusion. So in order to do that, we're going back to the actual text. So here we go. Now the serpent was the shrewdest of the wild beasts that God had made. At this point, all of the other animals have been created. Then the man was created, and then the woman was taken from him. And now there's a very strange interaction between the serpent or snake, same thing, and the woman. It said to the woman, did God really say you shall not eat of the tree of the garden? Okay, so there's one rule, basically, one mitzvah that is given to the first human beings in the garden that they cannot eat. There's one prohibition given to them. They cannot eat from a specific tree. So the serpent is referencing that idea. And the woman then replied to the serpent, we may eat of fruit of all of the other trees of the garden. It's only about the fruit in that one tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it nor touch it lest you die. So she's paraphrasing here. As far as we know, the first woman was actually not even yet alive when this command was given. The way the story was told, it was told to the first human being, namely who was the man, that perhaps woman was taken out of him, but she was not yet created when this command was given. Presumably, the man told her about it, though. And in case you want to see exactly how the original command was phrased, I brought it for us here in the red. It's from the chapter before. And it says that you cannot eat from the tree, and if you eat from it, you will die. This very specific tree, in Hebrew, it's the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and bad. All right, so now let's go back to the interaction between the snake and the woman. The serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die. Well, he's challenging what God said here. And it says, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad. It's a really amazing and interesting thing to think about, this idea of knowledge of good and evil. And at this earliest time in humanity, the human beings, when they were still in Eden, now human beings, there were only two of them, but that they perhaps did not have the same idea of good and evil as we did. And so the snake is enticing the woman to say, you want some of this. You want to know what good and evil is like, because then you will be similar to God. So the woman saw that she wanted to eat the fruit and that it would be desirable as a source of wisdom. Okay, it's a really interesting thing here that we don't necessarily always think about. As we'll see, we tend to talk about Eve as being seduced, as perhaps seducing, as being tricked, as the snake being tricked, all kinds of things like that. The interesting thing here is in the verse itself, it says that the woman is interested in a source of wisdom. Okay, we don't necessarily think of our stereotype of Eve as being a wise woman or someone who's interested in wisdom per se, but it says right here in the text that in fact is what she was interested in. It then says she ate it, therefore the fruit, and then gave some to her husband and he ate. Okay, we know also from other ideas that we'll see, or that I'm sure you've heard about, that perhaps getting her husband to eat involves some type of seduction or trickery or convincing, but really it's quite straightforward in the text itself here, in the biblical text itself. Okay, and then they both eat, and now they're in trouble, right? Because they've broken that commandment. I'm not going to read all of this to you here, but we know the idea that God comes looking for them, and then the accusations begin. God knows that everything has now changed, that they have eaten, that they now have this wisdom, and God asks the man, the human, why did you do this? He blames the woman. Then God asks the woman. She blames the snake. Blame game. Okay, and now we have the cursives. We're not, this also could be a whole class in and of itself, but basically all three parties involved, the snake, the woman, and the man, all are punished for what they have done, for disregarding God, for disobeying God. And the word curse, quite frankly, isn't used technically in all three instances, but it's clear that these are bad things that are meant to happen to the three after it, for the result of not um, listening to God. And of course, it's not to three individuals only. There's no question that what we're talking about here in the Garden of Eden are kind of like paradigms for the people yet to come. So when we're talking about a snake in this case, or a serpent, and a certain curse that's given to this snake, it's not only to that snake, it's for all snakes forevermore. Okay, that's one thing about snakes. But the issue, of course, becomes for women and then for men. It's not only this first woman, this first Eve, who's punished, but then all are punished after her with the same kind of curses, and similarly for man. And this is namely that all men after him will receive the same kind of curses. And this is really how so this becomes so important, not only because it's a foundational story of Judaism, but also, versions of it are foundational stories in Christianity and in Islam as well, the three major monotheistic religions. But also, it ends up affecting how people are treated and how people treat each other throughout time. If they see this as a lesson or a precursor for how all women should be and how all men should be and how they should interact with each other. So understanding it and how it has therefore affected society at large, or at least Judeo-Christian society at large, is very important. It's also very difficult, though, because they're difficult texts. They're in the Bible, after all. But also, there are different interpretations of them as time has gone on. And so those different interpretations end up affecting society as well. That's really what I wanted to talk to you a lot about today. Sorry, in terms of, we'll get to that next slide in a minute, but to talk to you about how these ideas have continued on in society and how they've changed and how then therefore have affected society as well, and how monumental they have been. All the topics that we're going to be discussing, over the next 6 classes, I think are not as equally weighty in terms of how they have affected society at large. Some of them have. This one probably the most, actually. It is the most. And because of that, though, I think it is so, so important, but also so very difficult because, of course, it's talking about the treatment of men and women in society and how they are meant to treat each other. And of course, throughout time until, very recent times with the rise, for instance, of modern feminism in the 19th century, it was taken for granted that men and women should not be treated equally and by everyone. Now, of course, it's still sometimes taken for granted today as well, but certainly it was taken by granted for almost everybody. And a lot of those ideas of inequality and the superiority of men really do come from understanding of these very verses. All right, just going to do a quick review now for a few minutes about where these ideas are coming from. I always like to put things in historical context. I think that's the intellectually honest and appropriate way to do things. And then maybe we'll stop and do some questions before we actually get into the Midrashim. All right, the text that I already presented to you is from the book of Genesis, the very first book in the Bible, in the what the Christians call the Old Testament, what the Jews call the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible. And it was primarily stuff from the second and the third chapters of that first book. As you can see on the screen in front of you, it's just a little reminder about what we mean when we say the word Tanakh. Tanakh is really made up of three different sections, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. I think actually it was a discussion I had with, I forget, either Carol, I think it was Randy, when we were coming up with the title for this particular series. She wanted to, you wanted to use the word Torah, Bible, excuse me, and she wanted to use the word Torah because she thought that was lovely for a shul, and I completely agreed with her. But I said it's not 100% correct because some of the ideas we'll be discussing in the following weeks aren't from the Torah per se. Some of them are from the books of the prophets or Nevi'im, or the books of the writings or Ketuvim. Because if you put all those three sections together, you get the Tanakh. Now, needless to say, in an informal way, though, sometimes people refer to all of this as Torah. The word Torah actually can sometimes be so all-encompassing that it's a little bit misleading, as we're going to see on the next slide. Sometimes when we talk about commentary, we call that Torah as well. But sometimes we end up qualifying that by calling it the oral Torah. Of course, that word in itself can be confusing too, because oral Torah was eventually written down and now it is in writing. Nevertheless, it is not, it is still sometimes called, the oral Torah. In Hebrew, you might have heard Torah Shebaal Peh. So when we talk about commentary to the written Torah, that is sometimes also called Torah writ large, but actually it is oral Torah or commentary. And the commentaries that deal with analyzing individual words and stories within the Tanakh are often called midrash, or in plural, midrashim. And so it's those kind of commentaries that we'll be looking at, and we're going to be trying to differentiate them from the written Torah or the Tanakh. Okay, I'm going to go back a screen for a minute. So the written Torah, nope, wrong way. The written Torah is all of this here, including the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. All of these books, traditionally numbered as 24 books of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, and then written out commentaries to them that were originally oral are very often called the oral Torah. It's not the same, it's different. And this includes Midrash that we'll be talking about. It also includes Talmud, which we spent some time talking about last spring. So I'm going to leave that out for today. Now, just to give a little bit of historical context, for those of you who have studied before with me, you have seen this, one of my favorite web pages. It's a timeline of the Jewish people made up by, I think it's someone who did it as a hobby, because there's ads on it and stuff, but it's an amazing visual of to be able to see the timeline of Jewish history on one screen in front of us. And it can be enlarged, which I guess I will do right now. I think you still see that enlarged now that I've enlarged it. And if we're talking about the Bible, which we are at first. All right, well, let's talk about, of course, here traditionally believed to be creation time we're talking about would be the year 0 according to the Jewish calendar. And over here, but if we're talking about, sorry, those are the free pop-ups because it's the website. But if we're talking about Garden of Eden, we're talking like around this time. And then we're talking about when the Bible was put together. Biblical stories are all reflective of from this time up oh, I'm so sorry about those pop-ups. Up until around, the year minus right about here. around the year 500, let's say BCE. And then the commentaries don't get written down until the Midrash, until the Mishnaic age after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 CE. So we're talking about a large span of time. I'm sorry for the pop-ups. It actually might have made it more confusing. I was hoping it would. All right. So that is where we've come from, biblical ideas, starting to talk about challenges posed by biblical ideas, especially when they are so potentially influential in Judeo-Christian culture at large. And now we have to understand a little bit about how a story which is potentially relatively innocuous. I mean, we have three, well, I guess four main characters if we're going to count God also, but we have four characters interacting with each other. Let's think about it like if you were reading a short story, let's say, outside of the context of the Bible. So we have, someone in charge, God. We have then three characters that enter the story. We have one law that they're meant to all observe, and then the breaking of the law, the decision of the breaking of the law, decision of who's involved with the breaking of the law. And then we have consequences that are results of breaking of the law. It sounds relatively straightforward. Oh, we also have, of course, some of the motives involved in some of the characters. We don't really have the motive for the snake. We have a description of the snake so far as being subtle. Sometimes some English translations use the word shrewd. Of course, the snake is very different from any snake that we know of because the snake can talk at the very least. And then we have a new character, this woman who's able to be convinced to not obey the law. And then we have her breaking the law. And then she has a partner. And she breaks the law. She wants to be wise. She breaks the law. And then her partner, she tells her or convinces or something, we don't know exactly, the partner to break the law again along with her. They're found out by the authority and then they're punished. That seems to be the story so far. And yet that story, as we'll see based on commentaries, have had a huge, huge effect on interrelationships of men and women, perhaps from that time until today. All right. Any questions or comments? I would love comments for this as well.
Anna, I'm going to ask the first question.
Go for it.
Maybe it's a basic one, but I was looking very closely at the language, and for the snake, it says that these things will happen to his offspring and his heirs. But for both Adam, like for the man and for the woman, it says your childbirth and for the man you will toil. Is it inferred that it's for all mankind and women? Because it doesn't say it in the same way it did for the snake.
Right. So of course, I love a close reading of text. And in order to be, of course, intellectually honest, when we're going biblical texts, we'd have to go back to the Hebrew. We don't have the time to do that right now. I think that it's an interesting thing to recognize about the whole Garden of Eden phenomenon, including the creation of human beings, is really meant to be, I guess, a paradigm, really. I mean, of everything that's to come afterwards. It's a role that, of course, is something that we can't really fully conceive of what this means to be the first two human beings on earth. And we're a story, a belief, whatever you want, however you want to refer to it, right? But a foundational story in our religion of the interactions and expectations of these first two people. And that the idea is that either that was always the goal that they would then represent or descended from them would be all other people, and so therefore they could be seen as some kind of a paradigm for people altogether. Either that was always the goal, or perhaps there's different opinions about that. They made it the goal because they were thrust out of Eden. Who knows? Maybe if it was just in Eden, there would never have been more people born. Like it, that without the knowledge of good and evil and sexual impulses that come with it and procreation. I mean, we certainly do have, I guess, we do have a command of procreation even before they leave Eden, but the life would be so Edenic, idyllic, whatever. I don't know. I can't begin to conceive what it'd be like. It's so interesting in Judaism, of course, we refer to heaven as being Gan Eden, as being the Garden of Eden. So it's a whole different paradigm from everything that we have particular knowledge of. That being said, the idea that women would have to have all that pain and things related to childbirth, and men have to work the soil, are things that were not Edenic, I don't forget what that, how to do that adjective. They're all things that happen after Eden. So it would have to continue on necessarily, I guess, for every generation afterwards.
I have one more little question. Again, just looking at the language that was
Good.
used. Eve was Eve from as soon as she was created from this other body. That other person was called human.
Right. Okay.
And that went on for a little bit. And then that human became Adam.
So again, Hebrew, but also and also translations and also vernacular. We are calling her Eve in this story, and in the title, because it was a catchy title. But in fact, she's not called Eve until the verse after. I gave you most of chapter 3. I didn't give you the very last, or I didn't give you all of it. The very verse afterwards, which I cut out just to save time, is where she is given her name, and she's given her name by Adam. So it's interesting in terms of naming, having the ability to name someone, potentially also a power dynamic is seen there as well. So with Adam in the name, though, oh my gosh, that one is hard because Adam means person, as well as, of course, it's the name Adam. Sometimes the term is used ha-Adam, the Adam, but that case it's probably the human. But the actual naming of Adam is not mentioned in the biblical text. It gets inferred at a certain point. Earlier on in the story, when we're talking about her, she would still be referred to as the Isha, that she is a woman, and she's taken from the Ish, from the first man. So we have a lot of playing around with names there that can teach us a lot, but also will necessarily confuse us. Sometimes, of course, when we're reading in the Hebrew, when we have the adjectives and the words all are gender based, masculine, feminine, things like that, or plural, singular, we can figure things out a little bit better in the Hebrew, but not always.
We have Bernard Katz has raised his hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and make your statement or question? Can't hear you.
Can't hear you. Oh, volume. Oh no.
No. If you want to write it in the chat, I can.
Oh, almost. That it? Did he come on? Bernard? Bernard Katz? No. Oh, his little microphone thing went off. It looks like he should be able to talk to us.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a volume. Well, I think, was there another question in the chat though? So let's take that one until he figures it out
I don't have a
write
question.
it out. Yeah, there is it in the chat. I see it.
Okay, why don't I?
Hey,
Oh, there we are.
I can see the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
How did the snake know that eating would bring knowledge? Yes, so I think that there's either some eavesdropping involved. This is probably the actual command was given to the first human before the first woman was created. So I don't know if when we have to go on some assumptions now that either there was some eavesdropping going on or that there when Adam when the first human sat down and gave the little lesson in Torah and law to the first woman, which presumably he did, again, it's not in the text itself, then perhaps maybe he taught all the animals the same thing. But that is all based on assumptions. It's one of these wonderful, frustrating things that are often a impetus of the rabbis and of the midrash to fill in some of the gaps, but we don't get all our gaps filled in, unfortunately. So I don't have any direct answer for the snake, how the snake would know. The next question, interactions, the template for male superiority. Yes, I think that's definitely the idea that that the Bible is building for us here, and that gets augmented once we start blaming the woman for even more, which we're going to see in the Christian and even the Jewish interpretations. That's our part 2 of today. So yes, you will see that even more.
And
And
one more, I think that was set directly to me. What about Lilith? Is
yes,
her
I got that
appearance?
too. Well, we had a whole session on Lilith last spring, so I don't think that we can do it today. Lilith is based on an idea from a medieval later midrash, and is often a way of dealing with trying to understand potential discrepancies between chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. But today we're doing chapter 2 and chapter 3. So I think I will leave her out of the discussion. I think the talk is might still be on YouTube actually from last year sometime. We definitely did a whole hour on Lilith. I think it's on the Out of Israel YouTube. Okay.
Do you see the
Oh,
Bernard
Bernard,
finally
you
wrote?
brought up this
Yeah,
question.
he wrote. Yes.
Following Arnie Rand and Rose, are you suggesting that the male superior thing over millennia dates back to biblical story? I mean, I think absolutely yes. I think the idea is, I mean, look, it's not going to explain the idea of patriarchal cultures that exist, of course, in the East as well. What we're talking about is what might have influenced, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. As far as we know, the idea of the patriarchal cultures, male superiority actually exists worldwide. So I'm not sure that it invents male superiority, or that is, I think, a matter of, anthropologists discuss that in terms of, division of labor and strength and, hunting and gathering versus planting and all kinds of other things like that in terms of like the origins of patriarchy, plus the fact that like women have to you know, gestate and actually give birth also, which tends to, keep them at home sometimes for at least a good chunk of, childbearing years in pre-industrial times. So I don't think that this invented the idea of patriarchy or male superiority, but I think that can be seen in other, non-biblical cultures as well. I know it can, but I think it certainly reinforces it. Let's put it that way.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, good. I love the questions. Thank you. Because it makes us all feel. I mean, I like it in general when I'm teaching, but especially for Zoom teaching, because hopefully it can, bring us all together a little bit more. All right, so we've hinted at these non-biblical ideas, and now it's time to actually see them. So we're going back to the share screen. Get rid of this other. Okay. Here we are. This was our timeline. Okay, so now you asked about Lilith. That is a demoness potentially in Judaism. We do need to talk about Satan today, though. So, Satan, or I've written for you in the Hebrew letters on top, I've written with Satan because it's a Hebrew word. Okay, so this idea of devil or Satan or adversary or opponent is an idea that originally develops in the Hebrew Bible. It is then extended tremendously by Christian thought. Okay, so if you're picturing, like, you might have remembered from the old cartoons, like, a little angel over here and a little red devil with horns and a tail and everything like that, and how those angels and devils look. That's not what devil is, or Satan or Satan in Judaism. Okay, it is, I guess, related to that, but different. So, what is, though, Satan in Judaism? It is some heavenly body. We do have an idea of angels in Judaism and different degrees of angels, certain ones that are higher and certain ones that are lower, but all of them are underneath God. Okay, God has ultimate power over everything, including all heavenly bodies, including anything that are like angels, or in this case, Satan. So, translated as the word opponent or adversary, often in conflict with God. Also, sometimes in conflict with with the good impulse in individual people. It is a force that tries to prevent human beings from submitting to God or the divine will. And we see this biblically in one of the most fascinating and difficult biblical books that many people don't know about because it's actually not used as part of the synagogue service ever, but it is the book of Job, or Eov in Hebrew. And in that case, Satan is actually a main character in the story, and he is trying to argue with God, okay, because he's the adversary of God, nowhere near as powerful as God, but tried to argue with God that Job, who is a human being living on the earth, is only good and righteous because he has a good life. And that if his life was harder, that he wouldn't be as loving and devoted to God. And so this Satan or Satan tries to is able to encourage God to test Job in that way to prove the Satan's point. All right, so that's in a nutshell. Of course, it's much more complex than that, but in a nutshell of what we mean when we talk about Satan in Jewish thought. The idea, of course, of Satan, obviously, it occupies a much more prominent place in Christianity, right from the beginnings of Christianity, because even in the New Testament itself, in the Christian Bible, it talks about an ancient serpent. See how it ties into what we're talking about today? That is commonly interpreted as the snake that tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that ancient serpent is the devil and is Satan. And it then goes on to describe it as a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. So I guess this is where the redness of that little cartoon devil and also the horns and everything comes from, ideas that are as ancient, at least, as the Christian Bible or the New Testament. All right, so why am I talking to you about Satan? How does it tie in with this very important story from the Garden of Eden? Well, we have here a midrash. Remember, we're talking about this type of rabbinic commentary that is almost always read in conjunction with the written Torah in order to provide more layers and more commentary. And we have a very strange midrash here, because this midrash is built on, I don't want to call it a spelling mistake, but it's kind of built on spelling flexibility. If there are any elementary school teachers in the Zoom here, you're gonna freak out when it comes to the flexibility we have with spelling issues in this midrash. But in fact, there are other midrashim that kind of have a similar technique. All right, so let me explain to you what I'm talking about. It says here, Rabbi Chanina, the son of Rav Edi, said, from the beginning of the book of Genesis, from his impression from the beginning of time, really, from an ancient rabbinic conception, until now. Okay, now at this point doesn't mean Rabbi Chanina's time, but it means now in terms of at this point in the story when the first woman arrives on the scene. There has not been a samech. Okay, we have here the letter samech. In English, I wrote it out. This is what the letter samech looks like, right? That one looks like a circle almost. So the idea, and it makes the sound s, okay? So according to this rabbi, from the beginning of the Bible up until the story of Eve, where she is taken out of the side or the rib of Adam or the human being, and then his flesh is closed up where the initial piece of her had been extracted from. That closing up is like has to do with the word sagar, like liskor to close the door, even in modern Hebrew. It's the same root there. So that a samech appears there in the first time that the first woman appears. And his claim, according to this rabbi, that is the first time a samech appears in the story, and therefore you can not the story in the whole Bible thus far, and so you can learn something from it. That once, and that's the last two lines here. Once Eve was created, Satan or Satan was created with her. Okay, so this is really a problem for anyone that cares about spelling. But the sound s in Hebrew can be represented by two different letters, by both a sin, this letter here, sin, or a samech, this letter here. Okay, so what the rabbi here is saying, the first time that the sound s appears in the Bible appears here in chapter 3. And so when we hear when we first hear about Eve being created, it means that Satan is with her. Okay. Now this is rather convoluted. As I said, it's built on a spelling mistake because a sin is not the same as a samach. Okay, it makes the same sound, but it's not the same letter. And also it's actually based on a factual error because the letter samach does appear earlier on in the beginning of chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. So it's based on an error here. That being said, so you might say, well, Anna, why are you sharing it with me? And I'm sharing it with you because this idea then goes on to be pervasive. It probably it existed earlier, maybe in Christian thought, maybe in Jewish thought, and it's an idea that continued afterwards. So even though it seems to be riddled with error, it's an idea that stuck. See, that's really what I was thinking about when I was talking about in the intro, what we were saying, which are things from the Bible, which are things from later, and does it really matter? I can tell you from the Bible, there's no mention of Satan in the story of the Garden of Eden. Eve can be portrayed, as I try to, as a relatively neutral character, not necessarily negative at all. I could tell you that, and I think the Bible says that. That being said, the tradition of how the Bible has been understood since then doesn't see it that way. It tends to see her as negative. We haven't mentioned, of course, the famous phrase, original sin, right? We're going to talk about sin in a minute. A Christian idea that is very complex and understood differently by different people. But this idea of there's a big deal that something very bad happened that people are to blame for in this chapter of Genesis. And then therefore it is basically the downfall of humanity since then, is something that has been read into the text. And this particular midrash, even if it is filled with spelling mistakes or spelling misassumptions, maybe. Clearly, this idea has won out. Okay, I'm sharing with you here another Jewish idea that comes from around, well, that's older than the Midrash I just shared with you. It's older than the Christian idea, which we'll see in a minute, but it's not something that's found specifically in rabbinic ideas. It's a Jewish text that comes from the book of Ben Sira, which is sometimes called Sirach or Sirach, I don't know how to pronounce it, or Ecclesiasticus, not the same as Ecclesiastes, that's a different book, but Ecclesiasticus. It's a book in the Apocrypha, which the Catholics believe is part of the Bible. It's not considered as part of the Bible, according to Jews or by other Christians, but it is an ancient Jewish book nonetheless. And in general, it's not very friendly to women, this particular book. But this interesting verse is included in it, chapter 25, verse 24. Of the woman came the beginning of sin, and through her we all die. Okay, so this can be, we talk about paradigm and curse, and paradigm for women to come. This one pretty much sums it up for us here. Here's a Christian idea. This one, actually, I was going to put a big cross on it so you would designate it and remember that this is not Jewish, but then I thought maybe that would be a little distasteful, so I didn't put the big cross on it. But please, please, please remember, this is from the New Testament, and it was not Adam who was deceived by Satan. The woman was deceived, and the sin was the result. Okay, so here we're starting to see this correlation now of snake and Satan. Okay, there's somehow a connection between the two of them. This is an ancient Christian idea, okay, but not terribly different from other of the Jewish and then Midrashic ideas that we're seeing. Okay, so there's one other Midrash that I want to share with you. We're almost done. And this one, we've talked about sin, we've talked about evil, we've talked about Satan. We haven't talked much about sex, but sex really comes into the story also with some of the versions. So here we go. This is from a medieval midrash called Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and it names this Satan that we were talking about, this heavenly body that's below God, but an adversary of God, and is really responsible for convincing people to do evil, not responsible for evil. We're responsible for our own, we got free will to do evil, but responsible perhaps for convincing people to do evil. He is referred to here as a great prince or Sar in heaven. As I said, there's different kinds of angels in heaven. What did Samael do? He descended and saw from the heavens and saw all the creatures which the Holy One, blessed be he, had created in his world. And this is still in the Garden of Eden. And he found among them none so skilled to do evil as the serpent. This is one of the questions actually that someone said before. Like, what's the deal? How did the serpent know about this? What did he know about the rules? Why is he changing them? Why is he evil? There's something in the serpent that is seen as inherently evil or potential for evil. And it said, now the serpent, because it has to do with this very confusing verse that we already read together, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast in the field. The truth is the English translation, word subtle, is not very satisfactory because the Hebrew word is very unclear, in fact, what it means. So it could be seen neutral this way, or it could be seen more negative, which is how clearly the Samael was taking it. Its appearance, in this case, the it is referring back to the snake. Remember, our first snake can talk and can think and can reason. Also, this snake looked different. We've learned afterwards that his punishment was that he would crawl on the ground on his belly. So we are learning from this, in fact, that the snake originally had 4 legs and looked something like a camel, as a matter of fact. And Samael, this heavenly being, this Satan, mounted on top of the camel and rode it. Okay? And that the Samael then, riding on the serpent, came to her, to the garden, in the Garden of Eden, came to the first woman, and she conceived Cain. So here is an actual physical union between personified evil and the first woman, that she actually had sex with the devil, that the devil or Satan was brought to this woman with the serpent. The serpent or snake was somehow the conduit to bring evil personified in Satan to um, Eve, and that she conceived Cain, the first of the two sons who were eventually born, first two sons, excuse me, born to Adam and Eve. That it turns out here, based on this midrash, that in fact Adam was not Cain's father, but rather that Cain was conceived by the devil. And then, based on a reading of the text, it explains here how they learned that. So now we've brought sex into the story as well. So we have evil, we have sex, we have punishments, we have disregarding God, we have uh, snakes and devils, and we have now women connected through these commentaries, Jewish as well as Christian, with the idea of sin and the devil. So this idea of the unification or bringing together at least of women with being, and the paradigm of women, the first woman being connected, intimately connected in a inappropriate sexual manner, even, which also is a negative effect of a negative taint on the story, to the notion of sin and the notion of devil and evil. So we've taken the story and we've tried to perhaps understand the world around us. The world around us does have evil in it. The world around us does have sin in it. The world and around us does have iniquity, like inequity in it, unequalness. It has power struggles in it. It has women suffering in it. I mean, men suffer too, but specific type of suffering attached to women. And it's taken perhaps where there are hints of those ideas in the biblical story itself, but only hints, and tremendously amplified them. And this is why I think, because all of those things still exist in the world together today and have caused so many problems in the world today, or all throughout all time, that we can begin to see the magnitude of the of the importance that commentary and biblical commentary have, how they have affected the world.
Anna, it truly does go back right to the very beginning.
Right.
So, right,
Right.
all of what's going on, as you say,
Yes.
through the world, it's right back there. Wow. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Anna? I don't see anything in the chat. I don't know whether you see anything new, Anna.
No, I don't see. And I just have to admit that these are big ideas, okay? They're big. There's so much more, than I could possibly present to you in an hour. But the idea is I just wanted to perhaps whet our appetites and our thought processes with hints of ideas that have existed in our tradition, originally written, and later commentaries, and just begin to understand ramifications. Okay.
Okay.
This part of the Torah reads like a Harlequin romance. Well, maybe the way I described it, I don't know. You'll pay attention, of course, next time. The Bible is yours. You're welcome to open it up and read it as well. And yeah.
And then one more comment is the notion that Cain was not Adam's son common.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, this particular story is a well-known story within Midrash. I think by bringing Cain into the story in this way, there are different versions of this midrash that don't state it quite as explicitly, but I actually kind of appreciated it when I was thinking about it because, that whole story, which is not on our list of things to do, the first murder, the first fratricide, um, of Cain killing Abel is so drastic and horrific that I almost felt a little bit better to hear that Cain, who did so evil, came from evil. I don't know. That it was a comfort for me to a certain extent. I didn't make it up, it's there in the text, but it is not absolutely prevalent. No, not at all. But I'm admitting to you, I found it a bit of a comfort in terms of trying to understand where such horrific evil could come from.
And Bernard Katz, you're going to try
Bernard.
again. Can we hear you?
Let's see, did he type? Let's see.
He didn't.
No.
Oh, now I don't see him.
Something with his microphone, obviously.
Yeah. Maybe try typing it again, Bernard.
Yeah, Bernard, try typing it in. We'll wait another minute.
Interesting. I can see where you can do, like, there's more. Like, let's go.
Yes, there's more.
Let's go another
There's
layer.
more.
Yeah.
For this topic, I actually was kicking myself after when I started preparing. I was like, oh my gosh, why'd I pick this one? So big. I didn't know who would lead. Hopefully you're not too, if you're frustrated, hopefully you're frustrated enough to push you to learn more. For me, it was, I didn't like the picking and choosing so much. It was frustrating for me to plan it. I mean, I'm happy I did, of course, and I think these are really important ideas to share and to think about. And it's really important to do. So I'm so happy to have the opportunity to do it. That being said, how do you choose?
Well, Bernard, if you're still, I don't see you, but if you're still with us.
Oh, came up.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, the influence of things. Okay. Zoroastrianism, the concepts of the devil. All right, so, oh my gosh, now we're getting biblical criticism, biblical history on me here. So certainly the idea of good and evil in terms of a dualistic system where good and evil are equal is something that I believe comes from a time that ancient times, which some biblical historians claim is even older than the Bible or perhaps contemporaneous with the Bible, that was based in Persia, was a religion called Zoroastrianism, which is an idea of dualism, of where there's more of an equality of good and evil and the powers of good and evil. So certainly ideas like that existed. Whether there's a direct correlation to how we see the idea of devil and Satan in Judaism is not exactly clear, because there is no equality of a power of good and a power of evil in Judaism, because that would make Judaism not monotheistic. It would make it dualistic. So that does not fly in Judaism. So the idea of Satan, or even plural for Satan, which appears sometimes, are entities that are of a lower have a lower amount of power and influence than God's self. So that was a little bit about devils and dualism, but that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not a complete expert on it.
Okay. Well, thank you. We've gone over a little bit, and as you know, it's just never quite enough time. So, Anna, thank you so much, and thank all of you for joining us. And I encourage you, same time, same place next Tuesday for Abraham, smashing idols and fiery furnaces. So very interesting, Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you next week, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm happy you enjoyed.